Good to go. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Isaac Dawson. I'm CEO and founder of LinkEye. We do continuous asset discovery for external facing websites and infrastructure. So just a quick word about who I am. As mentioned, CEO and founder. Prior to that, I worked for a company called Verico that did dynamic and binary static analysis. I was the lead for the research and development for doing research on attack strings, trying to automate like SQL injection, but make it so it didn't actually destroy all of our customers' data. So trying to do things at scale safely. Prior to that, I was a application security consultant for Symantec and @Stake. Overall, about 19 years of experience, professional experience in information security. So real quick, I just want to give a rundown of what this talk is about. So the asset discovery problem, what is it? Why should your organization have some sort of asset discovery program in place? How the industry has really changed in the past 10 years or so, and how automation has really moved everything forward much faster than before. And I want to cover how to build your own program within your organization. So in fact, if you are a bug bounty person, you can probably take the same information and use it for your bug bounties. But for an organization, you might want to use this information to build your own program as well. And I want to cover the benefits of having one as well as not having one, and then some final remarks. So to really set the stage for what the importance of having an asset discovery program in place is, let's use this fictitious company called, I don't know, whatever, company.com. So you have your standard firewall with your web application servers, the databases in the back end. Now, this is probably highly monitored and highly secured, quarterly scans, monthly scans, everything's going great. But then marketing needs to set up some website, and they have a pretty tight deadline, let's say maybe 2 weeks, a month, that they need to get a website up. It needs to be able to take information from customers, but they can't really put it inside of the protected and monitored network, so they decide to put it into the cloud. It still needs to be able to update information in the customer database or have some sort of connection back to the infrastructure on the back end. Now, maybe this marketing team is smart and they work with the security and operations team. They got a firewall in place, everything's patched, everything's looking great. So campaign time launches, users sign up, buy products, whatever. Now, after a certain period of time, this site is no longer needed. It's no longer used anymore. The campaign's over. But let's say 6 months to a year out, someone starts probing this organization. So maybe they're trying to find vulnerabilities, SQL injection in the web servers for company.com. But things, again, are quarterly scanned, secured. So they start probing across for different subdomains, and they come across this marketing website. Now, it's been 6 months to a year. It's basically forgotten, hasn't been patched, hasn't been updated, and it could be compromised. So from here, they really have two options. One, if there is a pipe back to the protected infrastructure, they could use that, or they could try to take credentials from this marketing website and reuse it on other parts of the organization. Now, this may seem hypothetical, but I've already heard about 3 or 4 cases during this conference where people are like, yeah, my marketing site got compromised. The person from Duo just mentioned it yesterday as well. And I've been on customer calls where we give them a list of assets and that they didn't know they had, and they're like, wow, that site's 2 years old. I had no idea that was sitting there. Or it was a developer's virtual machine that they stood up and they forgot about it. We're just going to shut that off right now. So these things absolutely do happen. So let's use another example of, if you don't have an asset discovery program, some of the risks or issues that you're going to run into. So let's take an example incident where there's a new exploit that was released for Apache. So immediately you're going to have some questions. How many of my websites are affected? Or who do I ask to get that information? Is that information accurate and up to date? What versions do I have? Is this applicable to me? And even, is this site even under my control? Maybe I'm outsourcing to a marketing company and it's using my domain, but it's not something I can control. So now I have to communicate with that third party to get them to patch. So all of these things are going to take time to answer. And if you don't have a list of assets that's up to date and there's an emergency, you're going to be having some problems. You're going to be working against the incident time-wise. So the question I want to ask is, how long would it take you to answer these questions? So maybe a week. If you have to communicate with third parties, maybe a month. All this time, there's an exploit that is being exploited across the internet. So the second question would be is how long can you afford to not have answers to these questions? So to make things even worse, now we have much more than before, like 10, 15 years ago. We have this changing landscape where developers are bringing machines online. We have new hosts that are coming online. These hosts use different programming languages. So now you have two levels of things that you need to keep up to date with: the operating system level patches, the language that's being used patches. And these applications have their own sets of dependencies. So maybe they're using jQuery, maybe they use a Redis backend. Is that Redis backend that just got turned on, is that maybe unauthenticated and sitting on the internet? So these systems coming online and offline, you also have dependencies on top of dependencies, because maybe all these systems aren't running in your infrastructure. Maybe it's running in Amazon or Microsoft Azure. So if, let's say, Azure has an outage, how many of your websites are going to be affected? If you don't have this list, your inventory list, and it's not being complete, it's not being updated, again, these are questions that you would want to have answered before an incident occurs. TLS certificates is another great example. If you're not keeping up to date with your TLS certificates, when they expire, and they do expire, parts of your organization will no longer be accessible. If it's an API system, maybe a mobile client only goes through a certain API gateway, and if that certificate expires, now your mobile clients don't work. Another kind of concern with this changing landscape is if, depending on the size of your organization, Canon probably has this issue with mergers and acquisitions, where they're bringing on completely new organizations and they have to migrate them over to their systems, but that's going to take 6 months to a year to 2 years for that to actually occur, if ever. So you have all these systems that you need to be concerned with, and if you don't have this list, it's just going to be extremely hard for you to really to prioritize your security programs. So I want to take a quick look at the industry response and how technology and processes have kind of changed and where we're heading. Now, I think most of us in the room would agree, if any of you deal with product security or any sort of product development, that everything is moving towards continuous automation. So we have CI/CD, and now, thankfully, we also have security trying to integrate itself within this pipeline. So with these new automation routines, we have security trying to integrate itself at very specific points. But overall, everything is moving towards a continuous system, because it increases the productivity and it increases the features that we can push to our customers. And continuous security is becoming a large part of that. And there's this concept of continuous assurance, where you create a baseline of what you think is secure, you monitor it, maybe new features are released and you need to adjust your baseline. And it's just this model of continuous assurance. So all this is telling us is that we're moving into this era of continuous security. And I want to say that probably within the next 5 years or so, we're going to have most of our security testing being done continuously. It's going to become completely automated. The days of organizations using the excuse of you can't scan production, I think are coming to an end. Because guess what? We're getting scanned all the time, everywhere. So it only makes sense for us to utilize these security tools, because attackers are using it against us anyways. And a lot of this really has come out from bug bounties. And I don't want to say bug bounties have really changed the game, but I think they've really exposed what the game is to the public, that we're moving towards this age of being scanned constantly. Attackers are creating maps of our external facing infrastructure. They're using this information to build up lists of assets, technologies, dependencies. There may not be an issue today, but now they have a list to see if something occurs in the future that they can use against you. And bug bounties, again, I think have been really good at exposing this and showing that bug bounty people have a higher chance of getting paid their bounties if they automate a lot of their tasks. So they're moving towards this. In fact, there was a talk earlier today where two gentlemen were talking about how they were automating their bug bounties programs to find low-hanging fruits. So this basically means just scanning for all the easy stuff so that they can focus on the more critical high-level stuff. But even those low-hanging fruits are usually critical vulnerabilities, whether it's SSRF or XXE injection or any of these other types of attacks. they can be used to break in easily in an automated fashion. And that is probably the last thing you want. You would probably prefer someone having to take the time to try to break into your organization than having a script do it. So I want to talk about maybe building your own asset discovery program. I don't know how many of you in here are in that position where you're able to build something like this, but if you're not, you can use this information to talk to your security team or your operations team. And I really want to talk about why. So one of my beta testers, I was talking to them and I'm like, so why did you use my service or whatever? And they basically said, I don't want any surprises. I don't want to find out that this marketing site had been hacked for 2 years and I didn't even know that service existed. I just don't want to be surprised. I want to know what's out there, what level of patches or what versions of software I'm running. And I think that's probably a really good use case for a lot of these organizations. They just don't want to be surprised. So what if you don't have an asset discovery program? I would say probably one of the largest issues is it's really hard to prioritize your security and operations programs. So patch management has been flying around a lot here at this conference. And if you don't have a list of your assets, well, you can't patch them. And I really feel like the first step in any security programming is knowing what you have so you know how to protect it. And if you don't have that, it's going to be extremely hard. You're going to be working against the tide to really try to keep your systems at a good baseline of security. Another kind of issue that I see is more of an organizational issue where there's going to be finger pointing and blame. And I've seen this in organizations in the past where if something, let's say the marketing site does get compromised, well, people are going to start blaming marketing. Well, it's not really marketing's fault. It was everybody's fault because security forgot about it, marketing forgot about it. So if you have this list in place and you know who the owner of it is, it's much easier to work together to really solve these types of issues. And going back to the point of if an incident occurs or there's a new attack that came out, it's really time consuming to answer a lot of these questions. And that's not something you want to be working on when you're in emergency mode. You want to be remediating your issues as soon as possible, not trying to answer, where are my websites? And the benefits of an asset discovery program, I mean, it's been pretty clear, like you're able to answer a lot of these questions. You can have proper prioritization. Incident response becomes much easier once you know where things are, who the owner is, what versions they're at. And it really helps you determine your third-party dependencies and risks. I don't know how many of you here are familiar with the source composition analysis that's getting more and more popular, where product teams and developers in general want to know all of their dependencies. So it's like a third-party chain supply management risk issue. You can also do that from the outside as well, because there's tools that allow you to determine certain versions or what software you're running from the outside. So it really helps you build up a list of your dependencies and their risks, because there are going to be vulnerabilities that are going to be released that you do need to know about, and you do need to know if they affect your services and products in particular. Other kind of non-security related issues that really an asset discovery program helps with is system health checks. TLS certificates is more of an availability issue. Latency issues, if you have a good program in place that's doing continuous monitoring, you can get good feedback for how latent your requests are. So how do we get started? Well, first off, you're going to work with your teams. While it's something that could be done by just the security team, I wouldn't really recommend it. You really want to get input from all your teams, especially, again, if you're a product development organization. So one thing that I've seen work in the past is to have product teams submit their information, or product team owners, someone where you can delegate to, say, okay, you're creating this product, it's running these servers with these dependencies, and these dependencies are at these versions. So you get them to delegate that information so you can collect it in a single source of truth. Maybe it's a document or a wiki, someplace where people can update it with their information. You probably want to talk to your sales and marketing teams, see what websites they know about, what do they use on a day-to-day basis. Extracting information from logs like syslog. If you're using AWS, there's CloudWatch is a great resource to be able to pull out which domains and which sites you're using, as well as obviously the list of instances that you have. Probably the best one, the most bang for your buck is just talking to your system operators to get DNS records from their DNS servers. A lot of them let you export it. If you can export those DNS records to use that information, again, put it into a shared document or wiki. And security reports, hopefully you guys are scanning your networks on a quarterly basis. At least you can use that information again to build up this list. So let's talk about some techniques. This is kind of just a very high-level look of some of the techniques you're going to want to use to really extract. And once you have that list provided from the internal, let's take a look at it from the outside now. So techniques such as doing DNS lookups. If you have a list of IP ranges, just do reverse IP address lookups using the tool like dig. Extracting host names from certificates. So a lot of certificates these days will you can apply for a single certificate that matches multiple domains, and sometimes you can use that information to extract additional subdomains you did not know about. Zone transfer, or scraping host names from websites is another big one, where you just load up the web page and then you just take all the links out, and sometimes it includes subdomains. Zone transfers, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with zone transfers from DNS. It's amazingly still effective. I'm surprised how many sites or DNS systems are still configured to allow zone transfers from anywhere. NSEC and NSEC3 walking. So NSEC is it's called like next gen security or next security. Basically, it's a DNSSEC record type where you can think of it almost like a linked list where it has a link to the next record. So if you have a.company.com, it'll have another record for b.company.com and c, and you can literally just walk through the DNS. I don't know why it was implemented for DNSSEC, but they realized their mistake and they started to work on NSEC3, which now hashes them, but there's ways you can still do offline cracking of the hashes to, again, just walk through the domains. If you're more interested in these types of attacks or these types of techniques, just Google NSEC walking, you'll find tons of hits. And then brute forcing to find subdomains. So this is like you take www.company.com and then web.com and then vpn.com. So you have a word list that you kind of iterate through to find all these different sites. Permutations is pretty similar, except for you're permutating on various aspects of a domain. So if you find web.1.company.com, you're going to try 2.com, 3.com, etc. So depending, what I've seen in past with certain organizations is they have like naming schemes. So maybe they'll name one of their servers like red.company.com or blue.company.com. So if you have a initial list or initial host name, you're going to want to add permutations of that naming scheme, and that'll help you find sites in the future. So one major, really just a goldmine of information these days is certificate transparency. So major certificate issuers submit anytime they issue a certificate to a new company to the certificate transparency servers, which let's for this conversation consider it a public database. There's multiple servers. So I think there's like 15 or 20 now that you can basically go to and literally query from index 0, give me all your certificates that have been issued since 2017 or whatever. So the reason certificate transparency exists is to really help organizations kind of monitor to make sure that no one is like, say, trying to issue google.com certificate from, let's say, I don't know, Singapore. So it's this way of monitoring the certificate system, the PKI system, to make sure that the bad things are not happening. The benefit is that anyone can query this. So these servers are open to the internet. You can just, if you have a certificate transparency client, you can just go ahead and query it, pull out information. And there is a massive amount of data. So this is my data set. Right now, I've been running it for a couple months now. I've got about 6 terabytes of data with 19 billion records. Now, a lot of these are duplicates. Again, there's like 15, 20 servers, so the certificates may or may not be issued to each one of these certificate transparency servers. So unfortunately, you got to collect them all. I would not recommend doing this. There's better ways of doing it, which I'll talk about in a second. Oh, actually, just to show you what that data looks like, here's just a sample that I pulled out from my data set. Obviously, that's way too small. Let's bring up the magnifier. So we have inside, so I pull out very specific data, but it has you can't really see that. Just when I pulled it out, the server type it came from, and of course I can't move across here. There we go. Oh, it's not following. That's annoying. Never mind. So basically, there's just a lot of data that you can pull out. It's not even showing you. I'm sorry. Apologize. Wasn't looking over there. That makes much more sense. So here we have the name of the company. We have certain certificate properties that I, in particular, wanted to pull out. You have the actual certificate CN, or the common name, which you can pull out, as well as other verified DNS names inside of those as well. So for example, Cloudflare, when Cloudflare issues a certificate, it'll actually do a bulk issue with multiple domains inside of it. So you'd need to be able to pull all that information out. But again, it's just a ton of really good information if you're trying to find additional subdomains. So what services can we use to build out our asset list? crt.shell or et.sh is a free service that you can use from Komodo, which you just put in a domain name query and it'll give you all your subdomains pulled out from the certificate transparency servers. There's things like Hacker Target, which you put in a domain name and it gives you all the subdomains. Virus Total. If your organization is large enough and you have AS numbers or IP ranges, you can use these search tools to just put in an IP address and it'll give you a list back of all the ranges that exist. Sometimes you can even put in company names. The last one, blog-rapid7.com, it's a really great project by the Rapid7 team called Open Sonar, where they just do internet-wide scans, they do internet-wide DNS queries, and you can use that information in AWS Athena, which allows you to search for it, so you can search for domains that are specific to your organization. So that was kind of the passive acquisition. There's more of an active acquisition that you can use. The most popular these days is OWASP's AMAS project. Definitely highly recommend checking this one out. It's written by Jeff Foley. Again, it's an OWASP project. They have a lot of these links in here are included in AMAS, so it'll do it automatically for you. There's this service called CertStream from CaliDog, which monitors the certificate transparency servers in real time. So what you can do is you can just write up a quick client, say you want to match on your domains, and then have it basically alert anytime a certificate is issued from CertStream. For finding technologies used by your assets, you can use urlscan.io. So this uses Wapalizer on the back end, but what you do is you submit a URL, it goes to it, takes a screenshot, it takes that screenshot, and while it's loading the page, it actually extracts from JavaScript all the server information, the server headers, JavaScript versions that it can find. Other things you'll probably want to do if you're creating your own active acquisition program is for monitoring expiring certificates. I mean, you could just do this with an OpenSSL client if you wanted to and just knock it out in a bash script, or you can use one of these pre-made ones. Not too complicated. Some other popular tools, you got port scanners, Zmap, very fast, but only a single port. So I would recommend using probably MassScan if you want to do multiple ports, unless you literally just want to scan your entire organization for a single port. Nmap, the tried and tested and true, bit slow, but it gets the job done. Subdomain resolvers, there's MassDNS. For name permutations, you have AltDNS. So you can use all these tools in combination, but it is going to require some scripting. You're going to need to either schedule this using cron or some other type of scheduling system to use AMAS to do your enumerations. You have to create a CertStream client and get API keys for URL scan, and then you can start to build your own little pipeline. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to parse public data records. As I mentioned, certificate transparency is probably the biggest one, and the Open Sonar stuff. You can use AMAS. There's a track feature which allows you to do differentials between scans, so you can actually check the difference between them. And then you take that list of assets and you load it into URL scan. You can batch submit them, and then you can get the results for all your technologies and dependencies, as well as also take those sites that responded as a proper HTTP site to check certificates and expirations. Now you can take all this information and you can post it to a shared document or a wiki, or if your organization uses Slack, you can post it to Slack. So there's pretty much anything you can really do. And I think what's one of the more interesting things about creating your asset discovery program is you can really customize it any way you want. So if your organization is worried about brand protection, so people trying to register domains for typo squatting or whatnot, you can use, again, if you have that list of initial domains, you can use tools such as DNS Twist to see if anybody's tried to register domains that look very similar to yours. And you can also put this within your search stream client. So you can say, okay, not only do I want to know if new certificates are issued for my domains, I want to see if people are trying to issue certificates for domains that look very similar to mine. You can use malicious compromised domain checks such as Google's API for safe browsing. You could even script it up to do a curl checks if you wanted to look for specific files. Maybe there's one of your sites gets compromised through an admin panel and you want to check that all of your sites don't have that admin panel exposed. You could script it up. So some other considerations, IP addresses might be useless. It's one thing that I first really came to the conclusion of when I built my own system, that over time, especially with content delivery networks, a lot of these host names are just being, there's a content delivery network in front of it, it's called cloud fronting or fronting, where IP addresses over time just don't really mean anything anymore. They can't really point to your site. So if you're trying to scan something with an old IP address, it's not going to point to your domain anymore. It's pointing to some other organization. If you're doing brute force, I think it's built into AMAS, but I'm not positive, wildcard DNS domains. So this is a domain, if you send any type of query to a subdomain, it says, yeah, there's a domain here. It's not actually true. It's just responding yes to everything. So keep that in mind. And there's wildcard DNS checks that you can use. I think Google Chrome does some sort of testing for it. If you look at their source code, you can figure it out. Hosted services, again, like AWS and whatnot, you need to be careful scanning these things. AWS can be pretty strict about what's being scanned, although they've just recently changed their pen testing agreement to allow you to scan your own infrastructure, which is great, but I would not recommend trying to scan from their infrastructure. Also, be careful and gentle with hammering specific services such as websites and DNS. You're going to want to have some rate limiting in place, especially for DNS. You might think that DNS will be able to handle everything, but there's definitely some organizations running some older versions of DNS that are not able to handle everything. So always, if you can, let people know that you're going to be doing these types of activities before you do it, so they know which people to communicate with if there's an issue. So that pretty much covers everything I want to talk about. I just really want to drive home the point that asset discovery is really no longer a point in time. It's not something you just do once and just like, hey, I have an asset list, I'm done. Things are just changing way too quickly, way too often. You need to keep this list updated and up to date so that if there is an incident, if something does occur, you have real-time answers for those types, whatever that incident is. And honestly, this is more of a preventative type of system where you're really just trying to keep things up to date, know where they exist, know who to communicate with, and hopefully your organization will be the better for it. And that's pretty much it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
What's been the most surprising benefit that our customers come back with?
Surprising benefits?
Yes.
Well, so I would say probably knowing that there's sites out there that they didn't know was exposed that they could shut down. That would probably be the biggest one. Okay. How about in your experience?
Actually, I'd say the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he mentioned the other day about costs. So that's something I hadn't thought about. You're actually, if you have these sites that are online for 2 years, you're burning money. Like there's no reason for you to be running that site. And if you could just shut it off, you're saving money. So that's another benefit of having an asset discovery program.
Yeah, we look for expired SSL certificates, not because I care two stuffs about expired SSL certificates, but they're an indicator of obsolescence.
That's
if you haven't updated the SSL certificate, no one's logging on.
No one's using it. Yep. Good point. Any other questions? Great. Thank you. He asked me for his risk crowd system, he wants you to go to this website and sign up. It's riskcrowd, theriskcrowd.com. Thank you.